So today is day 10 and here is your system design interview tips number 10 for you. In the last message I received, many people are requested me to share some detailed way of thinking about trade-offs because they are not able to understand how to generate trade-offs during the interview. So today I am just going to take one example of my requirement on which I will share you how to generate the trade-offs and how to share the trade-offs to your interviewer, which may help you to analyze, and in your system design you can use this concept which will help you in your design interview. Okay, so let's start. So agenda for today is the basic idea is to share the trade-offs and improvements in your design discussion. Okay, let's say I am taking example today of use case designing a URL shortener. Alright, as an example, you can build a system like Bitly. Right, so at the use case scenario is your user is going to give you large input of URL, large size of URL, and they are expecting from this system, which is you are going to design, that you return a short URL to them corresponding to that large URL. And so that in future when they will again come with the short URL, your system is redirect that short URL to the long URL, which is the actual URL of that system, right? So that is the very simple, like this is simple use case, one use case I am just considering to explain. Now, when you give little deep thought in this process, you can easily come up with few components, namely, which is important to design this system. One is you must have some kind of unique identifier generation system, right? Component must have, one component is unique identifier generation, right? Because that is what exactly your system is required. The second one is once you generate this short URL, you have to maintain this mapping somewhere in database so that in future, whenever you want, like vice versa mapping, kind of like short to long, long to short. For those purpose, you have to store somewhere in this mapping, right? The third important is redirecting, because that is also your system has to do. Redirecting, handling of redirects. For short URL, you have to redirect that short URL to a long URL, which is the actual URL. Right? Then scalability and high traffics, because once you generate short URL and it will give to the user might share to the very large set of people, and then those large number of people may hit those short URL, right? So that's why maybe your system will generate high traffic, high load, which definitely needs some kind of scalability to deal with, right? And since it's a short URL, and you also don't want to misuse the short URL so that can hamper your system. So to handle this situation, you're definitely going to introduce some security check so that it will be only called by valid system, not by manipulating or someone in between, right? So that's why this security aspect is also need to be implemented. Then another aspect of here, which if you have a time permit, you can add like KPI or analytics of that short URL. If any short URL might be very famous or it is very frequently get the call, then in that case, of course, I'm going to describe all these factors again. There you can see that in some scenario, you might require CDN or cache. So, but you can't cache every short URL. So this KPI or metrics kind of things will help you to decide which short URL need to be pushed into CDN, right? So that's why this is valid. All right, let's move on. Let's discuss one by one. Now, just discuss the unique identifier generator, right? Generation module. Now, in this system, you can see that here, when you think about the designing of this unique identifier, you will quickly realize that the uniqueness of your short URL depends on the code length. If length is higher, there are chances that you will get unique URL very frequently. But if code length is small, then you will see that your system start duplicating, right, short URL, which is not a good system as per design. So, like, you have to share this trade-offs with your interviewer that my system uniqueness depends on code length, and so that's why. But code length again creates some other kind of complexity, because maintaining the shorter codes is easy, but larger code is little difficult, right? Or if it is a shorter code, then also there are high number of chance that you will not get large number of unique short URL because it has a limit constraint. So I mean to say the trade-offs here is you can explain this kind of constraint to your interviewer, and accordingly you choose the code length. And how interviewer will help here? Interviewer will quickly tell you, okay, I need this many sort URL. I'm assuming that at max this number of sort URL is generated by your system. Based on that data, you can choose your code length. So the value of trade-offs is this here, right? Then again, another point is, like as I mentioned here, if your code length is smaller, you will start getting the collision, like duplication. But if you try to avoid the collision, there are certain mechanisms through which you can avoid the collision. But if you try to avoid the collision, it may impact the speed also, right? Because you have to do some extra things to maintain less collision possible into your system, and that will hamper your, that will actually affect your speed performance, right? So you second trade-off is here. This point you have to share the interviewer that if I have to maintain the collision risk, I may have to compromise a little bit about for speed. So now it is your, justification that which one will prefer, but you should prefer as per reason, right? And that reason communicated to your interviewer first. So these 2 points are the valid trade-offs here in unique identification, and this will come with the experience. Once you start observing, you can quickly understand that these things are very important, right? The third important point I was telling that when you share the trade-offs, you also share the future improvement, right? Because you are aware of that trade-offs, so you can quickly tell them, okay, the collision is, handling the collision is very important here. So we have to go somewhere we can implement where we are definitely handle the collision as much as possible, right? And for that purpose, like you should use some advanced algorithm, kind of base 62 coding or base 64 coding in coding. So these things will help you to decrease the collision, right? Another point you can mention like feature that because like the practical example of sort URL is this sort URL cannot be valid for very large number of days or time. It should not be valid for longer time, and that's why you would see that most of the system which is designed have a time limit, like life cycle is fixed, maybe 1 day, 2 days, 24 hours, 8 hours, 16 hours, like that. And after that, once it expires, you have to recycle, right? So you have to maintain somewhere in your system which will help you to recycle this sort code so that it can be used for some next like sort URL generation, right? This is also a improvement, future improvement of this system. As of now, you have not done, you have not thought, but of course in future you can do, which will improve. Another point. So now I'm assuming that you have designed your component which will generate your sort URL. Now after generation, you have to maintain, you have to put it into some persistent storage, right? Database or storage, right? How do you do it? So in database, whenever I'm talking about database, we have to always careful about selection of database, because, and that definitely give you the chance of discuss about the trade-offs. Now, let's say you are considering the scalability, all right, and speed. If you need both, then how you will think that which database, SQL or NoSQL, are better for you? So considering your system requires scalability and speed, which database, SQL or NoSQL, preferred for you? So as per system requirement, you can decide you will go for SQL or NoSQL. This trade-off can be mentioned in front of interviewer here, right? Because you have to select the database, but it is a SQL or NoSQL. It depends on your system requirement. Are you looking for larger scale and larger speed? In that case, NoSQL would be preferred. Are you really looking for, compromising speed, but consistency is very important, then SQL is very important, better than NoSQL, because NoSQL might have a little bit consistency problem somewhere, right? So that's why these things are important to understand first and then communicate to your interviewer. Now, another factor is, suppose you are choosing NoSQL. Just theoretically, I'm saying that, let's take example like you selected the NoSQL. Now, NoSQL, if you want to put it into reliable, if you want to put NoSQL as a reliable source, then there is a cost added here. What cost? You need to introduce replication factor to get the higher reliability, which will increase the infrastructure cost for your system. So this comparison need to be shared to interviewer that I know that reliability can be introduced by this way, but this is going to introduce a higher cost into the system, right? Then for better performance, this system definitely requires sharding and caching, which you can mention as future improvement. If you are unable to go within the time, with that time you cannot able to think on these areas, then you just mention that, okay, as a future improvement, I am assuming that sharding and caching can be introduced here for better performance, but that would be the future direction. Okay, let's move to the third one. Now we are done with generation of short URL. We are done with storage, database and storage. Now the third is handling of redirection, right? How do you handle the redirection? So when a user, what does it mean? It means like when a user clicks a short URL, the system retrieves the long URL from the database and redirects it for the user. Okay? Clear? When a user clicks the short URL, the system retrieves the long URL from the database and redirects to the long URL, which is the original URL for the user. Okay? Now your job is to share the trade-offs here. So in this case, like trade-offs is something, because this is handling redirects. A redirection, every system in this case requires less latency, right? Nobody wants a system which is taking time for redirect. For them, how you are doing doesn't matter. For user, it is only important that they like call with the short URL, you immediately pass on to the larger URL, the original URL which they have created. So latency is important here. Less latency required here. Now, if I have to introduce less latency, then I have to introduce the CDN caching, right? Because I want immediate, right? So I have to introduce CDN caching. And if I introduce the CDN caching, it will increase your infrastructure cost. So you have to share your interviewer that I know latency is important, and that's why to maintain the low latency, I'm introducing the CDN cache, which will be going to put some extra cost, but this lower latency gives the wow factor to our customer, right? So that is the another thing, very important, right? Now, as of now, we have introduced CDN, but is this sufficient? Because suppose your user is across the globe. Now you cache somewhere, is it not available to other location, right? So as a future improvement, you can suggest or put the point here that you have to think some kind of global CDN here, which help me to give the better experience to my user across the globe, right? That is what this future improvement is there. Now, fourth point, which is scalability and high traffic. Imagine your service gains more users. This service becomes very, famous. Suppose that even it get the maximum user even from more than Bitly. In that case, your system is overwhelmed with high traffic. Now, how you will handle this? For that purpose, you have to introduce scalability. Scaling your system is very much required to maintain the high traffic and same level of user experience. Correct? So in that scenario, when you have to put high scalability, it introduces the cost to maintain the higher performance or at least equal level of performance. I mean to say, in simple term, if your traffic is high and your server is limited, your server gets overwhelmed, and eventually it degrades your customer performance, user experience. User experience, and you don't want to do this thing because that is not a right experience for your user. To maintain the right experience, you have to scale your system so that your one system would not get overwhelmed. Load is balanced across your horizontal servers, which increment your cost of infrastructure, of course, but the experience of user is maintained here. So this is the trade-offs. Like you want to maintain the performance, then you have to increase your cost. If you don't want to maintain the performance, it doesn't matter, your performance degraded, also it does not matter, then you should take care of with one server or two server or limited server. But if it matters, then of course you have to use right number of scalability concept, and that concept will introduce the extra cost on your infrastructure. Another feature may require, once you start this scalability, you have to think about reliability of this distributed system now. And for maintaining the reliability, you have to introduce geo-replication. Multiple geography has replication for data persistency or other factor. So that is the future, but if you put it rightly, definitely it is a well appreciated concept, and interviewer will understand that you are really understanding the system very well. Okay. The fifth point is security and analytics. Let me mention here, security measure means such as HTTPS are necessary to prevent URL tampering, right? Because you don't want to URL need to be tampered and play by some hackers or someone who is in between capture, and then they are quickly creating a service which will overwhelm your server, right? So you don't want to do this thing. So that's why it is very important here to introduce some security measurement, some code based, some kind of token based concept, so that right user will only call your system, right? The wrong user, hackers, those are not allowed to go to your system, and that is very separate area, but you can introduce that. There is a proxy server introduced which will be handle these kind of unwanted calls. So that's why there, once you introduce the security, by nature security have to increase the complexity and decrease the ease of use. So you have to mention trade-offs like security and ease of use. I have to make compromise in somewhere. If I need to increase the security, I have to compromise from ease of use, right? Like that. Then another factor is, if you remember, I mentioned somewhere like serial caching, but you cannot cache everything, right? That is that will increase lots of cost into the system. So for that purpose, if you are doing some analytics, some KPI metrics you are generating, then you can identify that which sort URL is getting lots of it. For that, you can cache, and using that cache, that would be served to your user very frequently and very well managed way, well performant way, right? So that way you can say here in case of why analytics and how these trade-offs maintain in analytics side. So these all are the major factors here, where you can understand now that how trade-offs I can share to my interviewer and how future improvement points I have shared. Okay, I not mentioned here. In case of this security, what is the future improvement? You have to introduce some kind of mechanism where you frequently monitor and log the suspicious calls happening, because that way you can make more mature decision on your security, right? So that's why in future you can mention that you just introduce monitoring and logging system, which will help you to increase the security and track down the any kind of, if malfunctioning is happening, you can track down these. Okay, so these are the points like trade-offs and improvements, how you will in each point, how you have managed the trade-offs, how you have shared these trade-offs to your interviewer. This is very important, and if you are doing it in such a way, I'm pretty sure that every interviewer love this kind of concept, and they will definitely go with your idea of this.